Harrison Montgomery stepped confidently onto the sleek, glass-walled jet bridge, his polished shoes making soft, rhythmic clicks against the smooth flooring. Around him, the afternoon sun filtered gently through expansive windows, casting warm rays across the bustling airport terminal. Passengers hustled by, their suitcases rolling swiftly, conversations blending into a steady hum. Amidst the rush of travelers, Harrison moved with deliberate ease, a quiet but undeniable authority radiating from his every step. He paused briefly, glancing at his watch with practiced precision. 3:30 sharp. Perfect timing. Harrison was known for punctuality, a trait he'd cultivated meticulously through years of navigating corporate boardrooms, high-stakes negotiations, and international business dealings. As the CEO and primary owner of one of America's largest and most renowned airlines, he fully understood the value of discipline, punctuality, and attention to detail. Today, however, wasn't a typical business trip. Today, Harrison intended to experience his airline from a customer's vantage point, anonymously and unannounced. He had carefully booked his first-class ticket weeks earlier, personally ensuring everything was in order. It was an exercise he'd undertaken before, a quiet way of keeping his finger on the pulse of the company he'd built with his own hands. The jet bridge led him gently toward the sleek, polished aircraft, waiting patiently at the gate. At its door stood 2 flight attendants, greeting passengers with practiced smiles and welcoming gestures. Harrison nodded politely as he stepped on board, the transition from bustling airport to serene first-class cabin instantly palpable. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. The cabin interior exuded understated luxury. Soft ambient lighting highlighted the rich textures of the premium leather seats. Subtle notes of sandalwood and fresh linen lingered pleasantly in the air, and the gentle murmur of relaxed conversation set a soothing, refined mood. Every detail was intentional, carefully designed to offer first-class travelers not just comfort, but a seamless, elegant travel experience. As Harrison moved toward his assigned seat, Seat 1A, his personal preference, the quiet attention of his fellow passengers followed him briefly, drawn by his effortless composure. Yet, he revealed nothing of his true identity. To everyone on board, he appeared simply as another distinguished traveler, impeccably dressed in a tailored dark suit that fit him with understated elegance. His posture was relaxed yet attentive, his movements confident yet restrained. There was a sophistication about him, quiet, unpretentious, yet impossible to ignore. He reached his seat, quietly placed his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment, then settled himself into the plush leather chair, relishing its softness and comfort. Sliding a sleek briefcase neatly beside him, he took a moment to glance around the cabin, observing discreetly the efficiency of the crew. He noticed a few passengers already seated nearby, some flipping leisurely through the in-flight magazines, others sipping champagne served in slender crystal flutes. It was exactly the atmosphere he had envisioned when he founded the airline years ago. Relaxed, luxurious, exclusive. Yet he also knew that appearances could be deceiving. As he leaned back into his seat, Harrison allowed himself a quiet moment of contemplation, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From humble beginnings, he'd painstakingly grown his small aviation company into an industry powerhouse, gaining respect through dedication, quality service, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. He never took shortcuts, never tolerated mediocrity, and always insisted upon the highest standards. It was his unwavering dedication to these values that had earned him not only his considerable wealth and status, but also the profound respect of peers, partners, and employees alike. Yet, Harrison Montgomery knew better than anyone that leadership required constant vigilance, continuous improvement, and a willingness to see reality firsthand. Too often, executives allowed themselves to become detached, viewing their companies through filtered reports and sanitized summaries. Harrison was determined never to fall into such complacency. His quiet inspections had become almost legendary among his closest advisors, who privately admired his willingness to step into the everyday experiences of his passengers. Adjusting his platinum cufflinks, subtly engraved with his initials, Harrison settled deeper into his seat. Through the window, he observed ground crew bustling efficiently around the aircraft, luggage carts zipping back and forth, technicians conducting their meticulous pre-flight checks. Everything seemed to run smoothly, exactly as he expected. Yet even now, beneath his composed exterior, Harrison remained quietly alert, aware that the true test of quality often lay not in the routine, but in the unexpected, the small moments that could reveal hidden truths about customer experience, employee attitudes, and corporate culture. He glanced discreetly toward the front galley, where flight attendants moved gracefully, preparing beverages and amenities for passengers. One attendant, tall and poised, adjusted her uniform carefully. He briefly observed her movements, smooth, practiced, confident. She appeared professional and composed, the very image of what he envisioned when hiring staff for premium cabins. Still, he knew better than to form judgments too quickly. True character, after all, was often revealed in subtler, unguarded moments. As more passengers boarded, Harrison allowed himself to momentarily reflect on his own anonymity, a rare privilege these days. Typically recognized everywhere he traveled, today he could simply blend in, experiencing his airline through the eyes of those who trusted his brand with their comfort, safety, and expectations. The anonymity gave him a unique perspective, one free from the careful interactions typically shaped by his status. He looked forward to seeing how his airline performed when its CEO was simply another face in the crowd. The intercom chimed softly, and the pilot's calm voice filled the cabin with a warm greeting and the usual announcement about their departure time and expected flight duration. Harrison listened attentively. Even these routine interactions mattered deeply to him, contributing significantly to passengers' perceptions of professionalism and reliability. Taking a deep, quiet breath, he settled fully into the luxurious embrace of the seat, his gaze lingering momentarily on the expansive window beside him, offering clear views of the runway and the distant horizon beyond. This flight wasn't merely a casual inspection. It was a reaffirmation of everything he valued, everything he stood for, and everything he hoped his airline would represent to each passenger who chose it. Harrison Montgomery knew well the responsibility resting on his shoulders, to provide excellence, consistency, and respect, without exception. As the boarding door gently closed with a reassuring click, Harrison glanced briefly at the small tray table where his boarding pass lay neatly beside his phone. The journey ahead, though seemingly routine, held deeper significance, an opportunity to quietly ensure his airline truly reflected his standards, his values, and his unwavering commitment to excellence. Little did anyone on board realize the calm atmosphere of this meticulously crafted first-class experience was about to be tested. Beneath the polished surfaces, beneath the gentle smiles and quiet service, lay a hidden drama waiting silently to unfold. Harrison Montgomery, always prepared, always vigilant, allowed a faint knowing smile to briefly touch his lips. Today he would quietly, meticulously observe, and by the time this flight landed, things might never be the same again. From the moment Angela Prescott spotted Harrison Montgomery stepping confidently into the first-class cabin, something about him immediately unsettled her. Tall and impeccably poised, Angela had built a career out of reading people at a glance, judging who belonged and who didn't. It was second nature, something she believed she excelled at, more than anyone else aboard this aircraft. Yet today, as she fixed her piercing blue eyes on Harrison, she felt an uncomfortable hesitation, a subtle yet nagging sense of doubt. She watched carefully as he approached seat 1A, his stride calm, his posture dignified. His tailored charcoal gray suit, while clearly of premium quality, did nothing to convince her. She narrowed her eyes slightly, scanning him from head to toe, making her silent assessments. His quiet confidence seemed genuine enough, but Angela wasn't convinced. Over her years of serving first-class passengers, she'd developed a finely tuned instinct for identifying passengers who, as she privately called it, didn't quite belong. Her expression hardened slightly as she watched Harrison place his carry-on into the overhead bin with practiced ease. She adjusted her uniform meticulously, smoothing down non-existent creases, her composure firm and professional. Yet beneath her polished exterior lay a layer of subtle judgment, a quiet arrogance that Angela rarely concealed fully. Determined to maintain the standards she believed necessary for this exclusive environment, Angela moved swiftly toward Harrison, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished floor of the aisle, drawing attention. Other passengers glanced up, sensing a shift in atmosphere, but quickly returned to their activities, unaware of the subtle confrontation unfolding around them. Harrison had barely settled comfortably into his seat when a shadow fell across him. He looked up slowly, meeting Angela's gaze with quiet calmness. She stood there, tall and elegant, her blonde hair pulled into a neat, flawless bun. Her face was attractive, her uniform impeccably pressed, yet the coldness in her eyes was unmistakable. Harrison recognized immediately the hint of judgment, the slight pursing of her lips indicating skepticism and disapproval. "Excuse me, sir," Angela said, her voice carrying a forced politeness. "I think there might be some confusion." Harrison raised an eyebrow slightly, his expression calm but subtly alert. "Confusion?" Angela gestured toward the economy class section behind him, her movements deliberately slow, as if speaking to someone who required special patience. "This," she said firmly, emphasizing each syllable, "is first class. Economy is further back. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable there?" Her tone was cordial on the surface, yet beneath it lingered a subtle sting, implying clearly that he wasn't welcome here, that he'd made some obvious mistake. Harrison remained still, studying her face carefully. Her eyes moved deliberately over his appearance again, lingering skeptically on his suit, then his shoes, before returning to his face, silently evaluating whether he truly belonged here. He responded calmly, unfazed by her subtle hostility. "Thank you, but I'm quite sure I'm in the correct seat." His voice was smooth and composed, revealing no irritation, no defensiveness, just quiet confidence. Angela smiled thinly, a forced, humorless expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, extending one perfectly manicured hand, palm open expectantly. "I'll need to see your boarding pass then." Harrison reached slowly into his inside jacket pocket, withdrawing his boarding pass and handing it over calmly. Angela glanced briefly at the document, barely scanning it, as if already convinced it would validate her suspicions. After a dismissive second glance, she handed it back to him with a subtle shake of her head, accompanied by a patronizing sigh. "Ah," she murmured lightly, her tone almost amused but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You must have upgraded last minute." Harrison lifted one eyebrow slightly. "Actually, I booked this seat weeks in advance." Angela's lips tightened briefly, momentarily caught off guard by his composed and measured response. Yet she quickly regained her air of superiority, leaning in slightly closer, her voice lowering into a condescending whisper that carried clearly to surrounding passengers. "Well, even if you did," she continued slowly, her tone dripping subtly with disdain, "perhaps there's still been some misunderstanding. This seat is reserved for priority passengers after all." She straightened her posture, her eyes glancing around briefly as if silently seeking confirmation or approval from the nearby passengers. A quiet murmur arose from a few seats around them, subtle but clear enough to indicate that Angela's words were not entirely unnoticed. Harrison held her gaze steadily, not allowing his expression to reveal the slightest irritation or discomfort. In fact, he remained entirely unruffled, carefully observing her reaction to his calm defiance. He folded his boarding pass neatly and placed it deliberately onto the small tray table in front of him, his fingers lingering momentarily on the edge. "I appreciate your concern," he said smoothly, his voice soft yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. but as you can see, the seat assignment is correct. Perhaps you'd like to double-check your manifest? Angela hesitated briefly, clearly unused to being challenged so calmly, so confidently. She felt a slight flush of frustration rise in her cheeks, but masked it immediately, retreating behind the veneer of polished professionalism she'd so carefully cultivated. "Very well," she said finally, her voice tight but controlled. "Enjoy your flight." The words were cordial enough, yet her tone suggested exactly the opposite. A final attempt to assert dominance in a situation she'd clearly misjudged. Turning sharply, she strode briskly toward the galley, her posture rigid, anger simmering silently beneath her professional exterior. As she disappeared from view, she exhaled sharply, muttering under her breath, "Unbelievable," with an irritated shake of her head. From his seat, Harrison watched her go calmly, his gaze thoughtful yet untroubled. He had encountered people like Angela many times, those who judged quickly, believing their position gave them authority to determine who belonged and who didn't. While her attitude disappointed him deeply, he wasn't yet angry. Instead, he found himself quietly intrigued, carefully observing just how far this subtle discrimination might extend within his own airline. Around him, passengers had already returned to their own distractions, magazines, smartphones, or quiet conversations. But Harrison knew better. This small confrontation, though subtle and brief, had revealed more than Angela herself likely realized. Taking a calm breath, Harrison leaned back comfortably into his seat once more, calmly adjusting his cufflinks. Though Angela believed she had just asserted her dominance, she had unknowingly made the first critical misstep, assuming too much and questioning the wrong passenger. Little did she know, Harrison Montgomery was far more than just another passenger, and by the time this flight landed, Angela Prescott would realize exactly how costly her assumptions could be. As the aircraft began to taxi steadily toward the runway, the gentle hum of the engines filled the cabin, and passengers in first class settled into their seats, preparing themselves for departure. Yet, the tranquility that normally defined this exclusive space had been subtly fractured. A quiet undercurrent of tension had settled into the air, almost unnoticed at first, but now impossible to ignore. Angela Prescott, visibly irritated from her earlier exchange with Harrison Montgomery, moved deliberately through the cabin. Each step of her heels resonated with a cold precision that conveyed her simmering annoyance. Her professional facade had begun to slip ever so slightly, revealing subtle glimpses of the resentment beneath. Stopping briefly near the front row to adjust a passenger's overhead bin, Angela cast an openly disdainful glance back toward Harrison's seat. With deliberate volume, she spoke to a passenger seated nearby, an older gentleman impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, clearly a frequent flyer, accustomed to preferential treatment. "Mr. Bradford," Angela said, her tone deliberately audible to those nearby. "It's always refreshing to see passengers who understand the meaning of first class." Mr. Bradford glanced up from his newspaper, smiling politely but clearly unaware of Angela's deeper implications. "Thank you, Angela. Always a pleasure flying with your airline." Angela tilted her head slightly, her voice becoming louder, more theatrical, carrying easily to Harrison and several surrounding passengers. "Well, some passengers clearly understand the kind of standards we maintain here. Others, however—" She paused meaningfully, eyes flicking briefly yet unmistakably toward Harrison, "seemed to have wandered into the wrong cabin entirely." Harrison heard every word clearly, though he didn't allow his expression to change. Around him, however, passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A subtle ripple of discomfort moved through the cabin, breaking the previously serene atmosphere. Harrison observed silently, noting with quiet disappointment how easily one person's prejudiced assumptions could unsettle an entire group of passengers. But Angela didn't stop there. Moving further down the aisle, she stopped abruptly in front of another passenger, a younger man dressed in casual clothing, worn jeans, a simple hoodie, a backpack at his feet. He seemed slightly uncomfortable already, perhaps sensing the judgment directed toward him since boarding. Angela stood firmly before him, arms crossed, her gaze openly skeptical and dismissive. "Excuse me," Angela said sharply, her tone making it abundantly clear that politeness was no longer a priority. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The young man glanced up nervously, startled by her confrontational stance. Yes, I think so," he stammered, reaching hurriedly into his pocket to pull out his boarding pass. "I booked this seat in advance." Angela's expression remained skeptical as she barely glanced at his boarding pass. Instead, she shook her head, sighing loudly. "Well, it certainly doesn't look like you belong in first class, does it?" Several passengers around them gasped softly, clearly shocked by her open rudeness. The young man's face flushed deeply with embarrassment, but Angela pressed further, emboldened by his clear discomfort. "Usually first-class passengers at least make an effort to look the part," she remarked dryly, her voice carrying an intentional edge of condescension. "Perhaps next time you'll be more comfortable sitting further back." From his seat, Harrison watched closely, his calm facade barely masking his internal displeasure. Angela had now openly humiliated not one but two passengers, and her attitude had moved from subtle judgment to outright contempt. Still, Harrison chose to remain quiet for the moment, carefully observing just how deep this problem ran within his airline's ranks. He knew this confrontation was rapidly approaching a point of no return. From the galley, Mia Caldwell, a younger flight attendant who had been quietly observing, felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She was relatively new, ambitious, and eager to impress, but Angela's behavior deeply unsettled her. She glanced nervously around the cabin, seeing the discomfort etched clearly on passengers' faces. Mia knew Angela's reputation for being judgmental and difficult, but this had gone beyond anything she'd witnessed before. Still, Mia hesitated, torn between her sense of duty and her fear of Angela's influence within the crew. Angela Prescott held seniority, respect, and considerable power over their careers. Challenging her openly seemed reckless, almost dangerous. Mia looked down, busying herself with rearranging napkins and cups on the snack cart, desperately avoiding Angela's eyes, hoping somehow this situation would resolve itself. Meanwhile, Angela had turned back, walking briskly through the cabin, returning once more toward Harrison's seat. She stopped deliberately beside him, openly eyeing him with unconcealed disdain. "Would you like anything before takeoff, sir?" she asked curtly, deliberately omitting his name, her tone unmistakably cold. Harrison met her gaze calmly. "No, thank you," he responded quietly, his voice polite but unwavering. Angela hesitated a moment, clearly irritated that he refused to show any outward discomfort. With a final dismissive glance, she turned away, muttering quietly but loudly enough for those seated nearby to overhear. "Clearly, some people have no shame." At that moment, the tension within the cabin intensified, becoming palpable. Passengers shifted uneasily, exchanging uncomfortable glances, clearly disturbed by the blatant disrespect they'd just witnessed. Harrison, however, remained quiet, composed, absorbing everything he had observed with measured precision. Mia, sensing the rising discomfort and embarrassment among passengers, felt her courage begin to rise, yet fear still gripped her. Her heart pounded, knowing she should intervene, yet terrified of the potential consequences. Angela Prescott was powerful and influential. Would speaking up jeopardize Mia's own position? She bit her lip, glancing again toward Harrison. Something in his quiet dignity moved her deeply. Clearly, this man didn't deserve such disrespect. Neither did the younger passenger in the casual hoodie, who now sat quietly, visibly shaken. Mia took a slow breath, trying to calm herself. She knew she couldn't remain silent much longer. Her sense of fairness wouldn't allow it. Harrison, sensing the deepening turmoil around him, quietly reached for his phone. Calmly, he typed out a brief but direct message to his personal assistant waiting at corporate headquarters. Angela Prescott, senior attendant. Immediate HR background check required. Check complaints filed. He placed the phone back into his jacket pocket with measured care. Angela Prescott had crossed a line, not just once, but repeatedly, openly disrespecting passengers, compromising the very values he had built his airline upon: respect, dignity, fairness. He had seen enough. Though outwardly calm, Harrison knew that today's flight had already escalated beyond routine observation. Angela had inadvertently revealed not just her personal prejudice, but a potential cultural issue deeply embedded within his airline's service ranks. Unaware of how deeply she'd miscalculated, Angela Prescott continued moving through the cabin, adjusting trays and offering polite smiles to those passengers she approved of, oblivious to the storm she'd quietly stirred into motion. In the quiet solitude of seat tonne, Harrison Montgomery calmly steepled his fingers, deep in thought. The situation had escalated beyond a mere misunderstanding. Angela Prescott's behavior was unacceptable, and worse, damaging to his airline's reputation. It was clear now that a confrontation would soon be inevitable. As the plane gently lifted off the runway, Harrison allowed himself one quiet, purposeful breath. Angela Prescott had no idea of the reckoning quietly approaching her, one she had brought entirely upon herself. The plane was now cruising smoothly above the clouds, sunlight gently illuminating the serene first-class cabin. Yet beneath this superficial tranquility, tension simmered dangerously close to the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. Angela Prescott stood silently in the galley, her fingers drumming impatiently against the counter as she stole occasional glances toward seat 1, Harrison Montgomery's seat. Her irritation had transformed into something deeper, something sharper, a quiet fury. The mere presence of this passenger who refused to conform to her assumptions challenged the authority she had grown accustomed to wielding unquestioned. Determined to regain control, Angela straightened her posture, inhaled sharply, and strode purposefully back into the aisle. She walked directly toward Harrison, her heels clicking aggressively, her presence immediately capturing the attention of every passenger in the first-class cabin. Conversations quieted abruptly, eyes turning cautiously toward the confrontation about to unfold. She stopped deliberately in front of Harrison's seat, arms folded defiantly, her voice carrying loudly enough for everyone nearby to clearly hear every word. "Sir," Angela declared coldly, her tone sharp, authoritative, and entirely uncompromising. "This has gone on long enough." Harrison calmly looked up, his expression serene, betraying none of the anxiety or discomfort Angela hoped to provoke. "I beg your pardon?" he asked quietly, evenly, without raising his voice. Angela's eyes narrowed. She leaned slightly forward, her voice now sharper, openly confrontational. "You're wasting everyone's time, and frankly, you're making everyone around you uncomfortable," she stated boldly, deliberately projecting her voice so that every passenger could hear. "Either move voluntarily or I'll have airport security remove you from this aircraft." An audible gasp swept quietly through the cabin, followed by murmurs of disbelief from passengers clearly unsettled by Angela's brazen threat. Harrison's calm, measured demeanor stood in stark contrast to Angela's open hostility, yet inside he felt a flicker of genuine disappointment and anger. Angela's behavior had crossed every conceivable boundary of professionalism, yet he remained deliberately restrained, quietly observing just how far she was willing to go. Harrison slowly leaned back into his seat, regarding Angela calmly, his expression revealing nothing but quiet resolve. He spoke gently, his voice steady yet authoritative. "I've shown you my boarding pass already. I'm seated exactly where I'm supposed to be." Angela scoffed audibly, openly rolling her eyes in exaggerated frustration. "Your ticket isn't the issue," she sneered loudly, drawing every passenger's gaze. "The issue is you. You clearly don't belong here. You're obviously causing a disturbance, and now you're disrupting our entire first-class cabin." Harrison remained entirely unruffled, though his internal disappointment deepened. He knew he had every authority, every right to end this confrontation immediately. One call, one quiet statement of his identity would silence Angela instantly. Yet something stopped him. He chose to remain silent, observing carefully, curious about how deeply embedded such prejudice had become within the airline he had painstakingly built. Sensing her audience, Angela pressed further. "If you refuse to leave, sir, I'll have no choice but to involve airport security," she said clearly, her voice deliberately louder, unmistakably intended for maximum public humiliation. "Is that really what you want?" Harrison hesitated, the silence stretching unbearably between them. Passengers around them murmured uneasily, exchanging stunned, disbelieving glances. Mia Caldwell stood frozen near the galley, her heart pounding furiously in her chest, knowing she needed to intervene, yet still paralyzed by fear. "Are you sure you want to escalate things this far?" Harrison asked quietly, evenly, deliberately giving Angela one last chance to reconsider her actions. Angela's jaw tightened visibly. "I'm absolutely sure," she snapped. Without hesitation, she turned sharply, moving briskly toward the intercom handset mounted near the front galley. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Angela lifted the handset, speaking firmly, clearly, her voice resonating throughout the aircraft. "This is Flight Attendant Angela Prescott in first class. We have a passenger refusing to follow instructions, causing a disruption. Please have airport security meet us upon landing to escort this passenger from the aircraft." A tense silence fell heavily upon the cabin, passengers now openly staring, their expressions a mix of disbelief, embarrassment, and genuine discomfort. Angela had not only escalated matters publicly, but had deliberately intensified Harrison's humiliation. Yet, even now, Harrison maintained his composed exterior, though inwardly he felt a quiet anger, a disappointment profound and deep. Mia, unable to remain passive any longer, stepped cautiously toward Angela, her voice trembling slightly. "Angela, maybe we should double-check." Angela silenced her sharply, turning with cold fury. "This doesn't concern you, Mia. Stay out of it." Mia fell silent, stepping back, her heart pounding, feeling powerless as the scene unfolded dramatically before her eyes. Harrison noted Mia's quiet courage with appreciation, but kept his attention deliberately focused on Angela, carefully watching her actions, fully aware she had crossed an irreversible line. As the aircraft slowly began its descent toward the runway, passengers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging whispered comments filled with disbelief and concern. The tension within the cabin had become nearly unbearable. When the wheels finally touched down gently on the runway, the smooth landing provided no relief. Instead, the tension intensified. Harrison could see flashing security lights through the small windows as the plane taxied slowly toward the gate. His own pulse quickening slightly despite his outward calm. He understood the gravity of the moment. Angela had publicly humiliated him in front of an entire cabin of passengers, not because he deserved it, but because he had challenged her biased assumptions. The aircraft stopped, engines winding down. The cabin door soon opened, revealing two uniformed airport security officers waiting expectantly. Passengers held their breath collectively, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, discomfort, and undeniable drama. Angela stepped forward assertively, her voice clear and loud as she gestured unmistakably toward Harrison. "Officers, please remove this passenger. He's caused significant disruption and refused multiple instructions." The officers hesitated slightly, glancing uncertainly between Angela's cold determination and Harrison's quiet composure. Harrison calmly stood from his seat, straightening his suit deliberately, maintaining his dignity despite the overwhelming humiliation he'd been subjected to. Passengers around him openly murmured, some expressing quiet outrage, others shock. Harrison quietly met Angela's eyes, speaking gently, his voice carrying an undeniable weight of quiet authority. "You've made a serious mistake, Miss Prescott. You may not realize it yet, but you will." Angela, seemingly unmoved, merely crossed her arms defiantly. "Please remove him immediately," she repeated firmly to the officers, unwilling to relent. With quiet dignity, Harrison stepped calmly into the aisle, every passenger's eyes following him. As he moved toward the exit, he passed Mia, whose eyes met his briefly, silently conveying deep regret. Harrison gave a slight, reassuring nod, understanding fully that her silence wasn't driven by indifference, but fear. As Harrison stepped off the aircraft escorted by security, Angela Prescott stood triumphantly near the door, believing herself fully justified, entirely unaware of the depth of her error. She had chosen humiliation, chosen arrogance, and in doing so had publicly betrayed every value Harrison had meticulously cultivated in his airline. As Harrison left the plane, he felt the quiet intensity of the humiliation he'd endured, but more importantly, the depth of responsibility he now carried. This wasn't simply about him. It was about ensuring that no passenger would ever face such treatment again. Angela Prescott, standing confidently within the aircraft doorway, had unknowingly sealed her own fate. Harrison's silence had allowed her to reveal her true character fully, and she would soon discover the real identity of the passenger she had publicly humiliated. And by then it would be far too late. Harrison Montgomery moved calmly toward the aircraft's exit, his footsteps measured and dignified, flanked closely by the airport security officers Angela Prescott had summoned. A heavy silence hung thickly throughout the first-class cabin, broken only by whispers of disbelief from passengers. Every eye followed him carefully, sympathy and outrage evident in their gazes, though no one dared speak openly. Angela stood triumphantly at the front of the cabin, arms crossed in defiant satisfaction, her gaze unwaveringly fixed on Harrison's retreating figure. She had fully convinced herself that she'd successfully upheld the airline's standards, utterly unaware of the catastrophic mistake she'd just committed. Harrison reached the exit doorway, pausing momentarily as the security officers prepared to guide him down the jet bridge. He glanced back one last time, catching the eyes of Mia Caldwell, who stood near the galley, visibly trembling, her face pale and anguished. Their gaze locked briefly, a moment filled with unspoken understanding. Suddenly, just as Harrison stepped forward toward the jet bridge, Mia drew a sharp, trembling breath, her heart racing furiously. She had remained silent for too long, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, but this injustice was too great. Courage surged within her, overwhelming her hesitation. Stepping forward, she raised her voice clearly, powerfully, shattering the oppressive silence. "Wait, stop, please, stop right now." The urgency in Mia's voice immediately brought every passenger's attention sharply back toward her. Angela turned abruptly, eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mia, this is none of your business." But Mia refused to back down, shaking her head defiantly, her voice louder now, trembling yet firm. "No, Angela, you're wrong. You're making a huge mistake." Angela's face twisted incredulously, irritation flaring visibly. "What on earth are you talking about, Mia?" Mia steadied herself, her voice growing clearer and stronger. "This man, Mr. Montgomery, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's exactly where he's supposed to be. Mia paused, drawing a quick breath, forcing herself to continue. "He's the owner of this airline. Harrison Montgomery is our company's primary shareholder and the chairman of our board." A stunned silence swept across the cabin, shock and disbelief evident in every expression. Passengers exchanged incredulous glances, processing the sudden revelation, their murmurs growing louder, more insistent. The airport security officers paused uncertainly, looking between Mia, Harrison, and Angela, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Angela laughed sharply, dismissively, her voice now tinged with uncertainty. "That's ridiculous, Mia. You're clearly confused." But Mia cut her off sharply, raising her voice further, finally unleashing the full force of her suppressed frustration. I'm not confused, Angela. Check the manifest. Confirm it with the company. You'll see. You've humiliated and mistreated the very person who built this airline from nothing. Angela's confident facade faltered visibly, confusion and panic flashing momentarily across her face. She shook her head slowly, desperately clinging to disbelief. No, that's impossible. He couldn't possibly... At that precise moment, the aircraft door opened fully, and a group of sharply dressed executives swiftly stepped aboard, their expressions grave, authoritative, and unmistakably concerned. At their forefront stood Samuel Kensington, the airline's respected CEO, renowned throughout the company for his professionalism, dignity, and fairness. The moment Samuel Kensington laid eyes on Harrison Montgomery standing calmly near the exit, flanked by airport security, his face visibly paled. Recognition dawned instantly, shock swiftly followed by intense embarrassment. Mr. Montgomery, Kensington's voice trembled slightly, his normally steady composure shaken deeply. What's going on here? Angela turned abruptly, eyes widening, realizing in horror that this was real, undeniably real. Her defiant posture now crumbled visibly, replaced instantly by dread. She stood frozen, speechless, her confident arrogance collapsing under the weight of reality. Harrison calmly met Kensington's horrified gaze, maintaining perfect composure despite the humiliation he'd endured. Kensington, clearly shaken, immediately stepped forward, his voice deeply apologetic, respectful, filled with genuine remorse. Mr. Montgomery, I had no idea this had happened. I offer my deepest apologies. This is entirely unacceptable. His words resonated throughout the cabin, confirming beyond doubt Mia's revelation. Passengers openly gasped, whispering sharply, stunned at the dramatic revelation. Every eye now shifted accusingly toward Angela, whose face had turned completely pale, her composure utterly shattered. Harrison spoke calmly, his voice measured, authoritative, and resonant. Indeed, Samuel, this was a deeply unfortunate experience, but perhaps a necessary one. It seems we've uncovered a serious issue. Angela stammered weakly, attempting desperately to regain some shred of control. I had no idea who he was. Kensington turned sharply, his gaze fiercely cold. That's precisely the issue, Angela. It shouldn't matter who he was. Your behavior was unprofessional, disrespectful, and unacceptable. There are no circumstances under which a passenger or anyone should be treated with such blatant disrespect. Angela's mouth opened briefly, but no sound emerged. She stood frozen, powerless, utterly exposed in front of every passenger, every colleague. Her reputation, built carefully over years, had shattered completely in an instant. Kensington turned back respectfully to Harrison, his voice firm, decisive, deeply sincere. Please, Mr. Montgomery, allow me to escort you personally. We'll resolve this matter immediately. On behalf of the entire airline, I assure you we'll thoroughly investigate and rectify this situation. Harrison nodded slowly, graciously accepting Kensington's sincere apology. He glanced momentarily toward Mia, who stood quietly yet bravely near the galley, clearly overwhelmed by the consequences of her courageous intervention. Thank you, Samuel, Harrison said calmly, and please take special note of Ms. Caldwell's bravery. She demonstrated precisely the integrity and courage I wish to see in our airline. Samuel Kensington nodded firmly, respectfully turning toward Mia. Thank you, Mia. Your courage today will be formally recognized. Angela Prescott, meanwhile, stood utterly motionless, her gaze fixed blankly ahead, overwhelmed by shame and disbelief. The severity of her actions and their consequences now weighed heavily upon her. Passengers continued murmuring, openly expressing their shock, disappointment, and quiet outrage. As Harrison stepped calmly off the aircraft, accompanied respectfully by Kensington and the senior executives, he cast one final, steady glance toward Angela Prescott, a silent, powerful reminder that arrogance and prejudice always had consequences. Angela remained frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak, fully comprehending at last the magnitude of her catastrophic error. The cabin's murmurs grew louder, passengers openly shaking their heads in disbelief, outrage evident in their expressions. For Angela Prescott, this was not simply a public humiliation, it was a complete and undeniable reckoning. A profound lesson in humility and respect, delivered forcefully by a man she had misjudged entirely. As Harrison Montgomery exited the aircraft, passengers quietly applauded, showing their admiration, respect, and genuine appreciation for the quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the humiliating ordeal. In that powerful, unforgettable moment, every passenger on board and Angela Prescott herself understood fully the profound nature of true power, quiet, dignified, and utterly undeniable. Inside the cabin, a profound silence had settled, broken only by soft murmurs of disbelief from passengers who watched as Harrison Montgomery stood calmly near the exit, flanked now by Samuel Kensington, the CEO, and the airline's senior management team. Angela Prescott remained rooted to the spot, her face drained of all color, her earlier arrogance now replaced by pure panic and profound humiliation. She could barely meet anyone's eyes, her confident persona collapsing entirely beneath the weight of her devastating. Samuel Kensington turned toward Angela, his gaze piercing, unyielding, and profoundly disappointed. Every passenger instinctively sensed that a reckoning was imminent, a long overdue confrontation now unavoidable. Angela Prescott, Kensington's voice rang out clearly, firmly, and publicly, deliberately loud enough for every passenger to hear. "You have gravely misrepresented our airline's values today." Angela flinched visibly, her voice trembling as she desperately attempted to defend herself. "Mr. Kensington, please. I didn't realize who he was. I made a mistake." Samuel Kensington sharply raised his hand, cutting her off immediately, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "Your mistake wasn't in failing to recognize Mr. Montgomery. Your mistake was treating any passenger, any human being, with such blatant disrespect. Our airline has standards rooted deeply in respect, dignity, and equality. Standards you have utterly failed to uphold." Angela's composure shattered completely. Tears sprang suddenly to her eyes and she struggled visibly to control her shaking voice. "Sir, please, let me explain." Kensington shook his head firmly, his expression unwavering, his voice resolute. "There's nothing to explain. You've crossed a line that is absolutely unacceptable. Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty and will no longer represent this airline." Gasps rippled audibly throughout the cabin. Passengers exchanged openly approving glances, their whispers of disbelief now turning swiftly into quiet but unmistakable satisfaction at justice finally being served. Angela stood, stunned, disbelief etched clearly on her face, tears beginning to stream openly down her cheeks. Samuel Kensington turned to the waiting airport security officers, addressing them calmly yet firmly. "Officers, please escort Ms. Prescott off this aircraft immediately. She will not be flying again, not today, not ever again, representing our airline." Angela sobbed openly, her carefully maintained professional facade now utterly destroyed. She glanced desperately toward Harrison Montgomery, panic and regret visible in her eyes. "Mr. Montgomery, please, I beg you give me another chance. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Every passenger leaned forward slightly, openly witnessing this public humiliation. Harrison observed her carefully for a moment, quietly considering the sincere desperation in her voice, yet his expression remained calm, resolute, and entirely unmoved by her sudden apology. He stepped closer, his voice quiet, yet resonant with firm authority and deep moral conviction. "Ms. Prescott, respect is not a privilege you bestow selectively. It's a fundamental requirement. You failed today not because of who I am, but because of how you treated another person. Apologies now, born of fear and regret, cannot undo that." Angela's shoulders shook with helpless sobs. She turned pleadingly toward Mia Caldwell, who stood silently near the galley, watching carefully, overwhelmed by the consequences her courage had triggered. "Mia, please," Angela whispered desperately, her voice breaking completely. Tell them I didn't mean it." Mia hesitated momentarily, but then shook her head slowly, courageously meeting Angela's gaze directly. "You meant every word, Angela. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was cruelty. I'm sorry, but you brought this entirely on yourself." Angela's composure completely collapsed as the security officers stepped forward firmly yet gently, their faces neutral but resolute. They carefully took hold of Angela's arms, guiding her decisively toward the aircraft exit. Angela struggled weakly, desperately pleading one last time, but the officers remained steadfast. As Angela was escorted off the aircraft, the passengers in the first-class cabin exhaled collectively, a deep sigh of relief, of justice finally served. Some passengers quietly nodded their approval, others whispered openly, acknowledging that Arrogance and Prejudice had finally faced rightful consequence. Samuel Kensington turned respectfully toward Harrison, his voice once again apologetic yet firm. "Mr. Montgomery, again, we sincerely apologize for this incident. Rest assured, this matter will be thoroughly addressed. This incident will lead to immediate reforms and retraining across the entire airline." Harrison nodded slowly, accepting Kensington's words, but his attention swiftly returned to Mia Caldwell, who stood quietly near the galley, nervously clutching the edge of her uniform, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had done. Harrison moved decisively toward Mia, stopping directly before her, his voice gentle, sincere, and profoundly appreciative. "Miss Caldwell, your courage today, your willingness to speak the truth when no one else dared, is precisely the character we need in our airline. I thank you deeply for standing up for what's right." Mia blushed deeply, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. I couldn't remain silent anymore, Mr. Montgomery," she whispered softly. "It was wrong, and someone had to say something." Harrison nodded, his voice filled with quiet pride and genuine respect. "And because of your bravery, justice prevailed today. The airline will officially recognize your actions, Mia. You have my personal assurance." Passengers around them softly applauded, acknowledging Mia's courage openly, recognizing the bravery and integrity she had displayed in the face of fear and uncertainty. Harrison gently placed a reassuring hand briefly on her shoulder, a powerful gesture of respect and gratitude, before turning back toward Kensington. Samuel Kensington nodded respectfully toward Mia, acknowledging her openly before the passengers. "Thank you, Mia Caldwell. Your integrity and bravery have not gone unnoticed. You've shown us clearly what real leadership looks like." Mia stood quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear but from relief, gratitude, and pride. She had found her voice, confronted her fears, and helped restore justice and dignity to a situation that had spiraled horribly out of control. As Harrison turned finally to exit the aircraft, Samuel Kensington stepped respectfully aside, allowing him to proceed first. Harrison Montgomery walked with calm dignity off the aircraft, his presence resonating powerfully with everyone who had witnessed the remarkable events unfold. Passengers quietly but openly applauded again, moved deeply by the integrity, dignity, and quiet strength Harrison had consistently displayed, even in the face of profound humiliation. As he stepped off the plane, Harrison knew that today's experience would lead to lasting change, not merely within this airline, but also in the lives of every individual who had witnessed it firsthand. Angela Prescott had publicly lost everything she'd once held dear: her pride, her position, and her carefully constructed illusion of power. But Harrison Montgomery understood clearly that Angela's punishment went deeper than mere humiliation. It served as a vital lesson, a profound reminder to everyone present about the importance of respect, dignity, and humility. As Harrison Montgomery descended the jet bridge toward the waiting executives and security personnel below, he allowed himself a quiet, thoughtful smile. Justice had been served decisively, integrity had triumphed, and the courage of a single individual, Mia Caldwell, had turned a situation of profound injustice into an inspiring victory for human dignity. In the end, real power wasn't about authority or status. It was about courage, respect, integrity, and justice. And today, aboard this aircraft, those timeless values had been clearly, dramatically, and unmistakably reaffirmed. Harrison Montgomery stepped calmly onto the jet bridge, sunlight streaming warmly through the glass panels, illuminating his dignified figure. Waiting for him stood Samuel Kensington and the airline's senior executives, their expressions filled with deep regret, embarrassment, and a sincere desire for swift action. Kensington stepped forward immediately, his voice earnest and apologetic. "Mr. Montgomery, I want to assure you personally that today's incident will never happen again. You have my full commitment. We will rectify this issue completely and transparently." Harrison regarded him steadily, his eyes firm yet understanding. He spoke with quiet authority, every word carefully measured. "Samuel, what happened today goes beyond just one incident. This was symptomatic of something deeper, more troubling. Immediate action is essential, but real change must also follow." Kensington nodded gravely, fully understanding the responsibility Harrison was placing on him. "Please, sir, what actions do you wish us to take?" Harrison paused briefly, gathering his thoughts before outlining clearly, decisively. "First, initiate a comprehensive investigation into all past customer complaints, especially those previously dismissed or ignored. We need complete transparency. No complaint should ever again be disregarded without thorough examination." Kensington quickly nodded, signaling to his team to take notes. "Consider it done, Mr. Montgomery." Harrison continued calmly, his voice firm, unyielding. "Second, every manager or executive responsible for covering up, dismissing, or ignoring discriminatory behaviors must be immediately terminated. Accountability begins at the top. There's absolutely no room in this airline for complicity or complacency." "Absolutely, sir," Kensington affirmed with conviction. "We'll enforce it immediately." Harrison's tone softened slightly, his voice deeply sincere, profoundly committed to lasting change. "Lastly, Samuel, I want a clear, unequivocal public statement issued today. The airline must publicly acknowledge today's events, apologize sincerely, and make a binding commitment to radical reform. Let every employee, passenger, and the public know clearly, discrimination and disrespect have no place here. Zero tolerance must mean precisely that. Zero tolerance." Kensington stood straight, his expression resolute, determined. "Understood, sir. We'll release an official statement immediately, openly addressing what occurred and clearly outlining our actions moving forward." Satisfied, Harrison turned his attention briefly back toward the aircraft. Standing quietly near the exit, Mia Caldwell watched carefully, eyes wide, overwhelmed, yet resolute. Harrison gestured gently, inviting her to step closer. Mia moved hesitantly forward, her steps uncertain, yet filled with quiet dignity. "Mia," Harrison spoke gently, respectfully, his voice warm, reassuring, yet powerful enough to resonate deeply. "Today, when faced with fear, you chose courage. When confronted with silence, you chose truth. This airline needs exactly that kind of courage, now more than ever." Mia's voice trembled slightly, humility evident. I just couldn't stand by silently, Mr. Montgomery. Respect shouldn't be conditional. It belongs to everyone." Harrison nodded slowly, profoundly appreciative of her quiet strength. "Exactly. Your bravery deserves more than mere thanks." Effective immediately, Mia, you are promoted to lead a special task force dedicated to fostering genuine respect, fairness, and integrity within our airline. Your courage will be our model. Your voice will lead our change." Mia's eyes widened in shock, gratitude instantly overwhelming her. Passengers nearby quietly applauded, moved deeply by the genuine appreciation Harrison had publicly shown Mia. Samuel Kensington stepped forward firmly, addressing Mia directly, warmly. "Congratulations, Mia. You've earned this, not simply through your bravery today, but through the integrity and kindness you've consistently shown." Mia nodded gratefully, eyes filling with tears of relief, pride, and quiet triumph. Her bravery had been fully acknowledged, publicly recognized, serving as a powerful example for everyone aboard, within the airline and beyond. As Harrison finally prepared to exit the jet bridge, he paused briefly, turning back toward Kensington one last time, his voice profoundly reflective. "Samuel, what happened today wasn't just about me. It wasn't merely a matter of personal humiliation. It was about something much deeper, our shared human dignity, the respect each of us deserves, regardless of appearance or status." He continued firmly, passionately. "Our passengers place their trust in us. We owe them more than luxurious seats and fine dining. We owe them fairness, kindness, genuine respect, and dignity. That is the true meaning of first class. Make sure every employee understands that." Kensington nodded solemnly, moved deeply by Harrison's words. "Absolutely, Mr. Montgomery. I promise we will uphold that standard from today forward." Satisfied, Harrison Montgomery finally stepped off the jet bridge and into the airport terminal, his demeanor calm, confident, and unwavering. Yet something subtle had shifted profoundly within him today. A deeper awareness of his responsibility, a renewed commitment to upholding the values he had always cherished. News of the dramatic events quickly spread beyond the cabin, reaching passengers and employees across the airline network. Soon, television screens, social media, and news websites prominently featured the airline's heartfelt public statement. Kensington personally acknowledged the incident publicly, offering sincere apologies and firmly promising immediate, comprehensive reform. Passengers across the world applauded the decisive response. Internally, employees quickly embraced the story of Mia Caldwell's courageous stand as an example of integrity and bravery, recognizing it as a powerful, defining moment for the airline. Within weeks, substantial changes were implemented throughout the airline. Extensive employee retraining programs focused explicitly on respect, equality, and accountability. Leadership at every level underwent rigorous review, and individuals previously involved in covering up or ignoring misconduct were promptly removed from positions of authority. Mia Caldwell, now a respected leader within the airline, spearheaded these initiatives tirelessly, her quiet yet resolute voice guiding meaningful transformation from within. Her name became synonymous throughout the company with integrity, courage, and fairness, a living embodiment of the values Harrison had passionately advocated. Harrison Montgomery, returning to his position overseeing his global airline empire, carried with him a profound awareness and deeper resolve. His quiet dignity, unwavering composure, and passionate commitment to justice became legendary, respected deeply by peers, employees, and passengers alike. For Harrison, today's experience wasn't simply a moment of humiliation or even a personal victory. It was a powerful reaffirmation of his core beliefs: dignity, respect, equality. Fundamental rights owed unconditionally to everyone, everywhere, without exception. As Harrison strode confidently through the terminal, passengers who recognized him nodded respectfully, some even quietly applauding as he passed. But Harrison understood clearly, this victory wasn't simply his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever faced prejudice or disrespect. It belonged to Mia Caldwell, whose courage had inspired real change, and ultimately it belonged to every individual who believed in the fundamental, undeniable dignity of human beings. Today, aboard that aircraft, Harrison Montgomery had achieved more than personal justice. He had reaffirmed, decisively and powerfully, the enduring power of respect and human dignity. This was the real first-class standard, something no airline could ever compromise again. As we reach the conclusion of this extraordinary story, it becomes clear that what we've witnessed today goes far beyond a single encounter aboard an airplane. It's more than the humiliation of one flight attendant or the triumphant redemption of a misunderstood passenger. It's a profound lesson about how we see each other, how we judge each other, and ultimately, how we treat each other as human beings. Today, you watched as Harrison Montgomery, a man of significant power, influence, and wealth, stepped quietly into a role where he chose anonymity. He didn't flaunt his status. He didn't demand special treatment. Instead, he chose humility, observing patiently, carefully examining how his airline treated ordinary customers. Customers who placed their trust, their comfort, and their dignity in the hands of strangers. He placed himself in their shoes, understanding firsthand how people could be treated when nobody knew who they were. This story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror, one we must hold up to ourselves. How often have we made assumptions based purely on appearance, on first impressions, or on prejudices we don't even realize we hold? How often have we judged people before they've spoken a single word, before they've been given the chance to show us who they truly are? Harrison's quiet strength and measured responses to disrespect spoke volumes. Rather than immediately using his position to silence Angela Prescott, he chose patience. He chose to observe, to witness, to understand how deep the bias ran within his own organization. His silence was powerful, strategic, and ultimately transformative. It revealed more than any direct confrontation ever could. Harrison chose not to leverage his identity immediately, not to protect himself, but to uncover and expose a systemic problem. He stood in place of every passenger who'd ever faced humiliation, discrimination, or disrespect, ensuring their voices would finally be heard. And what about Angela Prescott? Her behavior, harsh and blatantly prejudiced, strikes a chord because it's uncomfortably familiar. How many of us have met or even worked with someone like Angela? Someone whose confidence borders on arrogance, who uses their position to make others feel small, who thinks their personal judgment determines who deserves respect and who. Angela represents something dangerous, something we must confront not just on a plane or in customer service, but in our daily lives. It's a reminder of how subtle yet damaging these biases can be, and how deeply embedded they often are within our institutions. But today, something remarkable also happened. You witnessed a young woman named Mia Caldwell find her voice. Mia was not in a position of authority or power. She didn't have wealth or status to back her words. She had something far more valuable: courage, compassion, and integrity. When faced with a choice to remain silent or speak out, Mia overcame her fear and stepped forward. Her bravery in confronting Angela's prejudice not only restored justice, but inspired genuine change. Mia reminds us that each one of us, regardless of our position, regardless of our fears, can be a powerful catalyst for change. We can all be Mia, standing up for what's right, even when it feels difficult or risky. Today's story wasn't simply about a wealthy CEO being unfairly judged. It's about every person who's ever felt unfairly judged, belittled, or humiliated simply because of someone else's assumptions. It's about every silent bystander who felt uncomfortable but said nothing. every employee who feared losing their job if they spoke up. It's about recognizing that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that speaking up, even quietly, has the power to transform entire organizations, cultures, and societies. Harrison Montgomery didn't seek revenge or vengeance. He sought accountability and meaningful change. The moment he had the opportunity, he demanded a thorough investigation, swift accountability, and real systemic reform. He didn't simply want to punish Angela. He wanted to eliminate the conditions that allowed her behavior to flourish in the first place. This isn't just a story about punishment. It's a story about responsibility, accountability, and lasting change. As viewers, it's easy to celebrate Angela's downfall, easy to feel vindicated that justice was served. Yet the deeper challenge lies in asking ourselves, are we doing enough in our lives, workplaces, and communities to prevent such situations? Are we demanding accountability from those in power, challenging prejudice openly, and ensuring everyone is treated with dignity and respect? This incident forced an entire company to re-examine itself, prompting widespread reforms and redefining standards. But real change shouldn't require extraordinary circumstances or dramatic confrontations. Real, meaningful change begins when ordinary people like you, decide that respect, fairness, and dignity aren't privileges reserved for the powerful. They're rights every human deserves, no matter their appearance, their social standing, their wealth, or lack thereof. Today's story must serve as more than just a moment of entertainment. It must inspire reflection and action. Look around your own life. Where are your blind spots? Where have you silently judged, assumed, or allowed prejudice to continue unchecked? How often have you witnessed injustice, but chose silence over courage, convenience over confrontation? Imagine if Mia Caldwell hadn't stepped forward. Imagine if Harrison Montgomery had simply announced his identity immediately, ending the conflict privately, discreetly. Nothing substantial would have changed. The underlying problems would persist unnoticed, hidden away beneath polite veneers and hollow apologies. Mia's courage and Harrison's determination to hold the powerful accountable is precisely what true leadership looks like. And that brings us to you, the person watching, reading, reflecting on this moment. What will you do with this story? Will you simply walk away, satisfied that justice was done here, but unchanged in your own daily life? Or will you take its lessons and actively apply them, confronting prejudice wherever you find it, holding yourself and others accountable, demanding fairness and respect in every space you occupy? Every day you have choices. You can choose silence, comfort, and passivity, or you can choose courage, dignity, and accountability. The world becomes what we allow it to become. It changes when ordinary people refuse to remain silent, when they refuse to accept injustice or discrimination as inevitable. Let this story be your inspiration. If you see someone treated unfairly, speak out. If you're in a position of power, use it responsibly and wisely. If you see injustice, confront it boldly. Remember Mia Caldwell's courage and Harrison Montgomery's calm resolve. Remember Angela Prescott, not with disdain, but as a cautionary example of what happens when prejudice, arrogance, and entitlement are allowed to flourish unchecked. This story is powerful not because of who Harrison Montgomery was, but because of what he did. It's powerful not because Mia Caldwell was fearless, but because she chose bravery despite her fear. It's powerful because it shows clearly that true dignity isn't measured by wealth or status. It's measured by our willingness to stand firmly for what is right, especially when it's uncomfortable or risky to do so. As you turn away from this story today, I urge you to take its lessons forward into your own lives. Challenge your assumptions. Examine your biases. Refuse to remain silent when you see injustice. Demand accountability from yourself and from those around you. This world will not change overnight, nor will discrimination vanish immediately. but every courageous voice adds to the chorus demanding dignity, respect, and fairness for all. Every small act matters, every moment of bravery counts. Every refusal to accept prejudice silently becomes another step toward meaningful progress. Be that voice, be that courage. Carry Mia's example forward. Embrace Harrison's unyielding commitment to justice. Reject Angela's prejudice wherever it appears. Share this story, talk about it with your friends, your colleagues, your family. Discuss why it matters. Encourage everyone you know to reflect on their own biases, their own silences, their own potential to create positive change. Together we can make fairness and dignity universal truths rather than mere aspirations. The transformation begins here, right now, with each of us deciding clearly and unequivocally that prejudice and discrimination no longer have a place in our lives or our communities. So, ask yourself now, will you be the quiet observer who says nothing, or will you be the courageous voice that makes a difference? The choice has always been yours. Today, Harrison Montgomery and Mia Caldwell chose courage, dignity, and respect. The question now is, will you?